I as a member have the obligation, and then the group has the obligation to also reinforce that they would like to hear from everybody. And this is pretty much classic group decision making, but we do see this especially when we have these equal levels of expertise. But taking the time to revisit the tour, because as you said, just because we survived and came back unharmed doesn't mean we did well, and the next time we might not be as lucky.
Hi guys, this is Daniel from the Edelread Knowledge Base, and today we have a special edition, we have a guest edition, and with me is here Svenja A from Florida State University, assistant professor at the Florida State University. And I have to explain, I think, a bit of the background before we start, into the topic. Reason why we're sitting here, reason why you're sitting here today, is there is a cooperation between Edelread and VD, which is the Albrecht van Dewitz Foundation. And in this, the target of the foundation is safe and sustainable mountain sports. And in this idea, we supported the study that you are running at the State Florida University. And the topic is group decision making, and especially group decision making in mountaineering and alpinism. From our perspective, it fits perfectly the idea of the knowledge base, because it's the same thing what we are doing. We have a risk, we have a question, we approach the question with a study, we create results, and then we publish the results in a knowledge base, edition, and this is why we're here for today. Thanks for joining, Svenja. Thanks for coming. I think the first question that came to my mind was why group decision making, why mountaineering, why this special topic, and I would expect a lot has been done already. Why is it so special from your perspective?
Thank you. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Good question. And I think it's one of those where you think there's a lot because you're interested in the topic, and then you go into the research and realize there really isn't. So I was developing a course actually on groups and group dynamics. And you have all these topics of cohesion and roles and leadership. And then there's one segment on group cognition. And literally all I could find on group cognition is on like static shared mental models. And if you think about sport, it's not a super dynamic context where groups often gather to make decisions. You don't have a soccer team coming together to make a decision how they're going to play. So very few degrees of freedom. And then I was thinking, well, what is a physical activity context where people work in groups and they are in a dynamic environment where they need to make decisions? I was like, oh, mountaineering, backcountry skiing. And I did a postdoc in Vancouver, British Columbia, and was exposed a little bit to the mountains and mountain sports. And it's really something I've also observed, that there is, that group component. And depending on what the group is like, it's going to be more successful, more risky, a better time. So I got really interested in the topic. I was living in the Netherlands at that point, so not really exposed to mountains, but then coincidentally ended up moving to Munich, much closer to the mountains later, and picked up that idea again and got in touch with the German Alpine Club. And we kind of struck up that collaboration that this could be an interesting topic. They were interested in increasing their mountain safety. I thought I could add something with this being a more like, it's not a technical topic, but it's a human topic, which obviously those are the people who use all the safety materials, the people who make these decisions. And that's how the whole collaboration got started. At some point I moved to Florida, so away from the mountains again, but I was able to take the project with me.
So the basic idea of the research, if I understand right, correct me if I'm wrong, is to find out more about group dynamics, especially in the stressy situation in mountaineering that we have every now and then. And the risky part there is that decisions in mountaineering can lead to dramatic results. That's, I think, a bit the problem that we are in. It's not an everyday situations that we have to find there. It's heavy situations, difficult situations, and dangerous situations every now and then. The question that I ended up a bit with as well did you find any parallels to these situations? Because there are everybody in his private life and in his business life and also in sports has to do decisions, but especially this very specific situation that you described, that there is a group under stressy situation, having to do dangerous decisions, probably dangerous decisions. Are there any other situations where there could be drawn parallels, or there could be investigations been done on it already?
Yeah, and I can talk a little bit more about that later when we talk about kind of what we've done, because one of the things we've done is a literature review. But initially, we had the same idea. First of all, it's like, well, this clearly must have been researched, because it has, like, as you said, it can have fatal consequences. If groups decide wrongly, we can talk about an Everest disaster, versus also if groups perform well, it's just more fun. People go back to the mountains. So exactly, that was my thought. And going into it, we discovered that there's very little research. And we'll get to the reasons why people might have not tackled that. But then we thought, well, maybe this is something we can borrow from the military or aviation or first response. And we'll probably get to that. But one of the things is, yes, those are instances where individuals work together under pressure, but it's always a work context. So it's always a context where there is lines of command, where there's hierarchy, where there's rules and regulations, patterns of communication. If we go out to the mountains for fun, we usually don't have these patterns. So
we talk about private groups, a group of 2 to 6 people going on a private mountain tour, and then probably knowing each other from before, or a bit more, a bit less every now and then together they're in the mountains, and then together they have to form a group and make decisions.
Exactly.
It's quite difficult to find parallels to that, because as you said, in military, for example, there's always a hierarchy in the group. There are always specialists for different topics.
And I think people also care less about like being liked or being like
true.
having a good time. Like as long as you execute, you're good. But in the mountains, like I think most of us go out there to experience and have a good time. So it's also like we have multiple motives, where it's not only about executing a task, but also giving an experience, whatever that means.
Okay, so this is the background, that's the idea. We hope that we'll find results that could be published in the end to help groups in the mountain making better decisions in the future. That's the idea behind this.
And I do think like it is translatable to other contexts, again, where groups have to respond quickly to dynamic environments where they maybe don't have these pre-scripted
either hierarchy or orders or like organized. Okay, got it. Okay, so that's the background. The approach. How do you approach this topic?
Yes. So first thought was we were going to do a case study with, and Germany has these, and you know this obviously, those like expedition training squads for
some young alpinists usually, or this is what they call international.
So they have these, and I was like, oh, this is super cool. It'd be interesting to work with that. And then things totally spiraled out of control, and we ended up doing a literature review, expert interviews. We are doing the case studies with these training squads. And then we're also tagging on a questionnaire study to just get a little bit more of a lay of the land of the average person who goes to the mountains, instead of those like highly elite 12 people who are in those squads. So we have kind of like a multi-pronged approach, looking into what is out in the literature already. What do experts who have a ton of experience say about this?
Experts? What do you
Mountaineers, professional mountaineers. And this is really like a word of mouth situation where people are like, oh, you need to talk to this person who has a lot of expertise, and then you need to talk to this person. So convenient sampling, but apparently there is expertise out there, and we just want to get our hands on that.
Okay, so literature research has been done already?
Yes.
It's finished already?
Yes.
Okay, a short... Can you give me the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about the literature research, literature review, the first and most interesting idea that comes to your mind when you think of that?
Yeah, and
what you found there? What changed your mind probably?
Well, and one thing I would even start with like the literature we've reviewed, because usually in research you go out and like search the research databases, and anything that's not in there doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And then we already knew like there is quite a bit of knowledge, but it hasn't made it into those scientific journals. So we tried something a little bit different. We'll see how that's going to be received. But we also included lay literature. So lay publications, and this is I think the like German Alpine publication back in Steigen, where there is quite a bit of knowledge published, but it would never make it into the scientific literature. So we decided to include that into our review because we counted it as knowledge. So we have the hard research literature, but also kind of that semi-scientific knowledge as well.
Which somehow makes absolutely sense if we think back of what we just said, that like from a psychological point of view, where you have the professional literature, the scientific literature, they are probably not too much interested in those situations because, as we said, they are very specific in mountaineering. Whereas on the other side, in terms of speaking from the mountaineering point of view, the psychological aspect is one of the most interesting because this is what you're in every day when you're out there in groups. So this is probably the reason why we find more background knowledge in Bergensteigen, for example, or in the mountain literature than in the scientific literature.
Yeah, in the scientific literature, a lot of times it's literally a researcher who was interested in mountaineering and then decided to study
and then to
have enough. So exactly. So that's really the situation. And it's also maybe one of the findings where there is quite a bit of expertise and knowledge, but it resides in individuals. So like experts just know how to navigate this better. Experts know how to make better group decisions. But then just like in these individual people, it's not really out there accessible to people who maybe aren't professional mountaineers. And from the the literature review, as I said, that's really one thing that came out, and it nicely triangulates with the expert interviews we've done because that's pretty much the same sample. Some people might have published their expert reviews in Bergensteigen, and other people had literally just talked to me about it. But it's kind of like that's also where our results are limited because right now we really only know how experts approach this, what their experiences are. So that's great and translatable to those, but yeah, go ahead.
This would have been one of my next questions because when I look to mountaineering from my perspective, I think one of the biggest issues there is that it's on totally different levels. It's probably something totally different when a group of highly trained alpinists or mountain guides are there in the mountain, or probably even a group of mountain guides. Versus all-day hikers on the weekend, and they're also in the mountains, but it's a totally different level. And all of those levels, do you think there is a parallel approach, or that there are parallels, or is it something totally different situations?
And that's a really good question. And we, at this point, I don't think we know. That's why we're doing the questionnaire study. So we're trying to get just a broader picture. What we found from the literature review is that novices have a chance to learn from experts, and that's what we're getting into, like risk assessment tools like a snow card or something, which really is based on expert heuristics that are made accessible to beginners. And I could see a similar thing also working for group decision making. At this point, what we're getting a sense of is how experts navigate this. And that's really where we're limited, but that's also where it becomes interesting because just because they're experts doesn't mean groups always work perfectly on that level.
Okay, to novices, for them, it's practical to have tools, decision-making tools, or data.
Yeah.
And how do the professionals decide then? Because they are the ones to create the tools in the end.
Yeah.
How do they decide?
Well, and it's one of the things where I'm like, I think this work is really important because I think we can be that translation between expert knowledge that resides within experts, and then we're making it accessible to other people. So what we're finding right now is one of the big things, and we briefly mentioned this earlier, the idea of intuition. Experts are not only technical experts, but they're also experts as kind of like, they're really good at listening to their own emotions. They're really good at listening to their gut feeling. It's not as if they wouldn't take into account, hard weather data or anything, but then they triangulate this with all the years and tours of experience they have to come to an intuitive decision. And I think that's one of the takeaways from our current work, that intuition is super important, but you need to train your intuition. If I just go out there for the first time, I don't have an intuition I can trust, but it's just like honed over years of experience. But then it is a really good guide. And if you're in a group, making sure that everybody gets a voice for their intuition. And that's something that seems to be helpful to make good group decisions.
So the tricky part then definitely is to decide when I'm on the level that I have a proper decision, intuition, that when from where do I know when I can trust into my intuition. This is probably one of the key problems I could imagine. And second, how to I think that's
and I think that's a really good point, because you mentioned this earlier, that kind of idea of like the what do you call it, like the false positive or the positive
skew?
That's
what I wanted to point on. The problem is a bit that the intuition is formed by experience. And experience is usually you go out there, you go on a tour, you come back home, you made an experience, But when you came back home, the experience seems to be something, it was positive because you survived. You didn't make a wrong decision because you survived. It's a very simple, brought it to the point. If I survive, it was a good decision. Is that the case? This, I think, would be one of the crucial questions. And then on the other side, every time I come back home, I get a positive feedback. So I think what I did and what I decided was correct. But in the end, I don't know, because it could have been that I just survived by luck and all the decisions were wrong.
Yeah.
So this is the two. When I come back home, when I survive, did I make only good decisions?
Of course, every time, yeah. No, so and this is where it obviously gets super complicated. And I do think and I was surprised how, especially the experts we talked to, but also in the literature, people are aware of dumb decisions they made where they still survived. So I think that's like a lot of us have that awareness where things got really close and we were just lucky to survive. And then there were some examples where people ended up being in difficult situations even though they did everything correctly. So I think as often we have to divorce the outcome from the process. And like in the process, that's the thing we have control over. Whereas, and then there's so much like arbitrary luck and other things that play into the final outcome. And it seems to be that in terms of like good decisions, that's a good process. So from a group dynamics perspective, that everybody partakes, that nobody gets ignored, that we are adequately taking into account all the information that's available. We're not neglecting something. That it's in line with the goals, whatever we set out to do, and then everybody's on board with the goals. And those seem to be some factors where people consider it a good decision as much as they can. But then there's always this like level of awareness that it can always only be as good as possible. Like there can never be a 100% certain decision or 100% right or wrong decision. And what I think is interesting, in order to learn what's good or bad, in order to have that feedback loop, you really need to like think about it and reassess and debrief after a tour. And everything went well, like you probably don't even see the necessity. Only if something goes wrong, then we use that as an opportunity to change. But really, even if everything went well, you should go home and debrief and think about like, was the process good or were we just lucky? And I don't think that happens a lot. I think the higher the stakes get, the more professional people are, the more this actually happens. And this might be something that we can learn from these professionals.
This is actually would have been the next point, like to keep this in a certain frame. And the study is not finished. I think the study is still ongoing.
Very much ongoing, yeah. And I feel we're generating more questions as we move along, but it's a career.
So we are in an intermediate stage. Nevertheless, are there already some intermediate findings, some key findings that you can tell us right now, where you already see that there is a certain pattern that is happening frequently, or some hints that you can give already due to the work that has been done that far?
Yeah, and I just want to delimit, right? Our samples right now is the literature review, which is mostly also expert mountaineers. And then literally expert mountaineers we talked to. So it's limited, but I do think that's probably something that they're just a lot better at some of these things where we can still learn from them. And a few takeaways that I would identify is, well, one thing is investing the time in setting the stage for a group and investing the time in consciously making decisions. So for example, under pressure, everything becomes exacerbated, where really you need to have role clarity as you go in. You need to have clear leadership structures. You need to have a reliable base for the group that you can rely on when things hit the fan, essentially. So spending some time to talk about what are our goals for today? Are we on the same page? Is anybody taking on leadership positions? How are we making decisions before you go out? And that brings us back to what you said initially, where this is not the military. This is not special ops. Like, we are a group of friends who go out, and like naturally we wouldn't do these artificial discussions, but that would really be helpful, because one of the things we found is the people, if we have a group of individuals who are all highly qualified but are in equal status, that seems to be really dangerous, because nobody seems to nobody wants to take responsibility, or even, put somebody else under pressure or make somebody else look bad. So we have people who are all able to make these decisions well, but now they're going out with each other and they're not.
Sometimes it's also about, I know the situation well. You're out there with 3 other mountain guides, for example, and you're not really sure, you don't really feel 100% safe, but still you don't want to, you're not 100% sure, probably the competences of the others are higher. So this is why they're going on, and probably they know better than you. So you just decide to keep on following, but probably they seem to think the same thing at the same time. And this is a bit of the, and nobody wants to blame the others by asking, hey guys, do you think this is correct what we're doing here?
Yeah, and I think this is like two things to be taken away from this is one, if I'm a group member, it's my responsibility to speak up. And if my intuition is telling me something that's important information, the rest of the group needs to know. And the group needs to have or foster an environment where if somebody speaks up, they get a voice and they don't get bullied for speaking up, but it's actually welcome if people speak up. And I think this is the 2 levels where I as a member have the obligation, and then the group has the obligation to also reinforce that they would like to hear from everybody. And this is pretty much classic group decision making, but we do see this especially when we have these equal levels of expertise. And what do you think? Like, oh, there's all expert brains and they should do this better. No, that's actually where things become more dangerous. And as I said earlier, like those explicit pre-briefs and debriefs, trying to learn from, and this can take 4 minutes, this can take 2 minutes, but taking the time to revisit the tour, because as you said, just because we survived and came back unharmed doesn't mean we did well, and the next time we might not be as lucky.
Okay, so I take the basic findings for me is the most dangerous is the group high qualified on the same level.
Yeah, don't ever go out with your friends.
Yeah, that's the point.
That's the takeaway, yeah.
Okay, got this point. Take more time for preparation, like role situations
building
in the
the group, kind of
building
setting
the
the stage.
group, making clear what's everybody's like clearer. Not only this is the mountain we want to go to and the target is the top, but also what are our individual targets on this day in this group.
How's everybody feeling? What are our aims?
Exactly, what are our competences probably as well. If it's a group that's very familiar with, then you probably don't need to do that. But
and maybe even talk about like, if we're making a decision, what are we aiming for? Are we turning around? What's our main? How is that going to play out once you get under pressure?
Yeah. And then third is the debrief. Like also after the tour, reconsider what went perfectly correct, where it's not 100% clear, or also probably where somebody or where we afterwards find that there are different perspectives on. Where in the beginning, like everything was clear, we went on, but afterwards we learn probably some of us wanted something else, but they didn't dare to speak up. Take more time for that. So that's
and it doesn't have to be super onerous, right? This can be like a 5-minute conversation on a drive back, but just I think like taking the time to make this explicit, because again, we are in this uncertain and potentially fatal environment, but we're not treating it as such. We're treating it as like a walk in the park, and it's not the same way from a group and a deliberate group decision-making perspective, where a comparison is first responders in the military.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay, last question, last part. How does it go on? What's the next steps?
Yeah,
as
I said earlier, one of the things we're trying to get a little bit of a different sample, so more like everyday mountaineers, trying to broaden, see if the results apply to the same extent.
To learn a bit more the difference between experts and average, or
maybe not,
between,
right? But we'll see. So that's one thing we're aiming for, and then one thing we're interested, ideally would like to get into the situation where people are making the decisions, really where they are at these decision points, and like almost. Yeah, and we're trying to find ways to access this, like secondhand, how we can be in those situations. And it's really hard. And that makes me think like that's the reason why nobody has done research on this.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is trying to get away from that positive skew to really look into situations where things did go wrong. So accident statistics, or getting access to individuals who have been involved in an accident. So again, to switch that to the things where we can maybe see like a difference between situations that go well and situations that go wrong.
Perfect.
That's the plan.
Sounds great. Svenja, many thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for the short, very compressed input. And I think we do another round when the study's finished. And
sounds like a plan. And if anybody else has input for this, I'd be happy to hear it.
See you back then.
Thank you.
Many thanks. Thanks for watching, guys. And see you soon in the next edition.